Okay, Shavua Tov, I think it's going to be us. So let's get started. Late at night. Late.
It's not that late yet. I still have plenty of work to do.
Well, there might be work, but it's still late. But if you're in Bermuda, it's 10 p.m. So
What's that?
you're in Bermuda, it's 10 p.m.
Uh, it's 10 p.m. in Bermuda.
Yeah, I know. I was there today. Okay, today's daf in
Now
the
you're in Bermuda, right?
I came home. No, I'm home now, but I woke up in Bermuda. So today's daf in Masechet Bava Batra is Tzadivav, Tzav, like the turtle. But we are not up to the turtle. We're up to the bottom line, 2 lines from the bottom of Tzadi Hey Amud Bet. And the question we came up with was that there were a lot of different ways to make wine. And I'm going to rely on what the Gemara tells us because I have no personal experience with making wine. But in general, obviously, wine is can become bad, right? It can become vinegar. And so there was sort of 3 steps that they talked about with wine. One is that wine was good. The second, which meaning it would last, and you could keep it in barrels, you can use it to cook, it would store well. A second was the kind of wine which you had to sell in the store that day. It was like, the day-old bread kind of thing, where you could use it today, it was okay, but if you waited 1 or 2 more days, it was garbage. And so there's value, and it is wine, and it does get you drunk, and people like it, but it certainly doesn't last. And you can't use it for cooking, I guess, because with cooking you need to they didn't eat right away, maybe, so it might take a few days or something. But either way, that is called yain hanimkar bechanut. And what we're going to say today, and I didn't say this yesterday, but we're going to say today, is that wine basically doesn't smell right, but it tastes okay. So this middle wine, so again, the best kind of wine is wine that smells like wine and tastes like wine. The middle kind of wine is wine that smells a little bit off. When you taste it, it's okay, and it's actually wine, which we all had. You smell the milk sometimes. It's a little bit off, but you taste it and it's fine. That's the middle level of wine, and the third level is not wine; it's chometz, it's vinegar, where it's actually turned into vinegar. So there, everyone agrees that if you don't make a bracha on vinegar, a brei pri hagafen, it's not hagefen. We had a machloket about the middle kind of wine. Do you still say brei pri hagafen, or is it no longer brei pri hagafen? You have to make shakon bidvaro.
It
So says
sounds
the
a
Gemara.
little bit like the Arbor Minimum, except we're missing the fourth one.
Says the
One
Gemara today.
smells good, and one doesn't taste good, and one tastes
Okay.
and smells good.
2 lines from the bottom. Let's stay focused for those of us who are tired. Amrle Abaya le Rav Yosef. We're 2 lines from the bottom of Tzadi Hayam Bet. Abaya said to Rav Yosef, Ha Rav Yehuda, Ha Rav Chisda. We had the opinions yesterday of Rav Yehuda and Rav Chisda about whether you make a bracha of shahakol or brei pri hagafen on this middle kind of wine. What's the halacha? Right? These are huge rabbis, big opinions. Mar kiman sphere like. Abai asked Rav Yosef, who do you paskin like? Very reasonable question. Amali Rav Yosef said back to Abaya a very enigmatic answer. And he didn't say an answer. He said, Matznita Yadano. I have a Mishnah. The Mishnah seemingly clarifies it. Titania. Now we're going to go to the top of Daf Tzadihayim and Aleph, first word on the page. We have a Breita. Now, this Breita is a very interesting scenario, which, when you think about it, is very relevant, right? The case that the Breita is really describing is where a person, let's just say, there's a lot of different applications of the case, but I'm going to give an easy one. A person runs a store and they sell wine, okay? People who buy wine don't want to have to take off Truma and Maser from the wine. So this guy who runs the store, he says, you want to buy a liter of wine, there'll be a 10% tax for Truma and Maser. And before I give you the liter of wine, I make a statement that 10%, Truma and Maser in this other barrel is going to be taken off for your wine. So you basically get a bottle of wine that has a stamp on it now. Truma and Maser was taken, right? And the storekeeper, let's just call him a storekeeper, has a barrel in the back that is his Truma and Maser barrel. And every week or something, he goes and he says, okay, I committed, X amount of Truma, X amount of Maser, and he gives it to the appropriate person, okay? So this is a good system. You don't have to take it off each time. You basically have a barrel that you collect the Truma and Maser from. So, and the problem, of course, is that you one day go to your barrel and it's turned into vinegar. So it's no longer wine. And the problem is, when you've been taking off Truma and Maser, how do you know when it became vinegar? You can't take off vinegar for wine. So once it became vinegar, your Truma and Maser is all null and void. But last time you checked, let's say you check once a week, right? Last Friday it was wine. This Friday it's vinegar. What about everything that happened during the week? So let's read that inside. Titania. This is a very interesting Braita. The Braita says, Haboteket chavit. You go and you check the barrel, which is the designated barrel of wine. Liot marfrish aleh truma, right? You want to use truma from this barrel. Basically, this is your designated barrel, right? One word, v'holech. You want to keep going. V'achar kach nimtzeit chometz, and at some point you find that the barrel has turned into vinegar, so it's no longer wine. Says the Braita, what do you do? Here's what you do. Kol shlosha yom, if for 3 days, vadai, then you know for sure the status. Mikan ve'elech safek, beyond 3 days, it's a safek. Now, we have no idea what that means. 3 days of what? 3 days of when? So ask the Gemara, my Amar. What are you talking about? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is what the Braita is saying. Hachikama. Kol shlosha yamim harishonim vadayayin. Let's say last Friday, you went and checked the barrel and it was wine. And the next Friday, you go and check and it's vinegar. So for 3 days after you check, you know it's still wine. Why? Because if you checked and it was normal, it can't become vinegar overnight. It's a process to become vinegar, right? It becomes, like we said, 3 stages. First, it's good. It smells good and tastes good. Then it smells bad and tastes good. That's a few days, let's say 3 days. And then it becomes vinegar. So for a minimum of 3 days, you know vada yain. It was still wine. After 3 days, it's a safek. You don't know if it became vinegar 4 days ago in my example, or 1 day ago. So all those days would be a safek. Mikan ve'elech safek. Now, my timer, what's the reason for that? Because Rabbi Yochanan holds that chamra, when you talk about wine becoming vinegar, mi'ila'a akar, it becomes akar. Akar means it turns, right? It becomes bad from the top. Meaning, if you have a barrel, it's the top part that becomes oxidized and whatever, bad first. I don't know if this is true about milk, but it's true about wine according to Rabbi Yochanan. V'hai ta'imei v'lo akar. A week ago, you came in last Friday, you looked at the barrel, you tasted the top layer to see what's going on, and it wasn't bad, right? So, im tim salomar, what are you going to come to say? That Batra de ta'ime akar, that, okay, right after you tasted it, it turned bad. But still, even if it turns bad, it's a process of turning bad. Havi recha chala, at the point it turns bad, it becomes the smell of chala, of vinegar, but v'tamei chamra. This taste remains wine for a few days, for a minimum of 3 days. And, says Rabbi Yochanan, kol recha chala v'tamei chamra, if you have a wine that smells bad but tastes good, that's called wine, chamra. So this seems to be a really wonderful proof, says Rabbi Yochanan, that you make a brei pri hagafen, because you consider this to be wine, even though the second after you checked it, it might have turned sour. But even if it turns sour, it takes at least 3 days to turn bad, quote unquote. And during that interim time, it's still considered wine. You can still take Truma and Maser on it, and you would presumably still make a brei pri hagafen. That's Rabbi Yochanan's explanation of the Braita. Rabbi Rish Lakish says, Rabbi Shua ben Lakish Omer, I don't know where I am.
Shua ben Levi.
Sorry, thank you. You're right. Rabbi Shua ben Levi Omar, thank you. Correcting me. Not Rish Lakish, right? Different Rabbi Yeshua, but it's confusing. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, that's not what the Braita means. The Braita means that for 3 days, it's vadai chometz, meaning if you come today and find that it's vinegar, it was definitely vinegar for a minimum of 3 days before, and everything you took of Truma and Maser is for sure not Truma and Maser, right? Why is that? Because he holds the opposite. We'll see in a second. Because it doesn't just become vinegar, right? It was a process to become vinegar, and the last few days, a minimum, it was that middle ground of bad smell, good taste, and Rabbi Shua ben Levi holds that's vinegar, right? Mikan ve'elech, from that point on, meaning 3 days and on backwards, it's a safek. So last Friday you checked and it was wine. This Friday you check and it's vinegar. Says Rabbi Shua ben Levi, for 3 days it's for sure vinegar. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But before that, we don't know. And therefore it'd be a safek truma and maser. My time, let's read inside what's his rationale. Because he holds that chamra mitatay akar, that actually wine goes bad from the bottom, from the low level. The Amar akar v'lavadatain. So sometimes wine goes bad and you don't know. That's really extraneous. But continues Rabbi Shua ben Levi, the imtim salomer mi'ilayakar, even if I go like you, Rabbi Yochanan, and I admit that you're correct, that wine goes back from the top. And last Friday, hata'ime v'lo'akar, you tasted it last Friday and you said everything was good. That's great. But you don't know if the minute after you close that lid, Dilma batar d'ta'ime akar. The moment after you close the lid, it started going bad. Now, of course, going bad doesn't mean it went completely bad. It means havi recha chala v'tame chamra. That on that day, last Friday night, it became a smell of vinegar and a taste of wine. And says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, I hold that the Tana of the Braita holds that reiche chala v'tame chamra, that if it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, which is the middle quality wine that they sell in the store, that's challah. That's not wine. That's vinegar. And so it goes with reasoning that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would hold that you would say shakon ni'ebed varo. So those were two opinions of the Braita. Now, before we get back to this a little bit, says the Gemara, there's actually a third opinion in the Braita, and that is Diromai. Diromai usually means those who come from the Darom, the southern rabbis, right? Which is not common, right? Yochanan and others lived in the north, but the southern rabbis, they explain the Braita, Matnu Mishmei Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, they explained the Braita in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi in a different way. And the way they explained it was that, look, last Friday, you checked and it was wine. This Friday, you checked and it's vinegar. And you know what the Braita is telling you? Rishonim, the first few days, let's say 3 days, vadayayin. It's still wine, for sure. The last 3 days from when you checked vinegar, achronim, vaday chometz. Any days in between is a safek, emtsaim safek. So that 3 days is vaday both ways. 3 days from when you tasted it, it's still wine. 3 days from when you found it to be vinegar, it's for sure vinegar. And of course, if more than 6 days passed, then the middle days are safek. Now, says Gemara, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because how could you say 3 days are for sure wine? Maybe it became bad right away. So what are you saying? Let's read it inside. Hagufa kasha. The Duromai, the Southerners, don't make any sense. Because Amrit, you said Rishonim vadayayin. That for sure 3 days after you tasted it and it was wine, it's still wine. That implies that even if the smell went bad right away, it's still considered wine. Alma, you see, recha chala v'tameh chamra, that if the smell is vinegar, but the taste is wine, it's still wine. It's still chamra, right? For at least 3 days until it becomes fully vinegar. But then you say, Hadar Amar, then you say, achronim vadei chometz, that for 3 days from when you found it to be vinegar, it's for sure vinegar, because if it's vinegar today, it was at least smelling like vinegar yesterday and 2 days and 3 days ago. But that implies, alma recha chala v'tameh chamra chala, that if it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, it's vinegar. How can you be certain in both directions? Says, well, you're right. You're correct. Of course, it doesn't make any sense to say it. What it's talking about here in the Southerners, the Duromai, is kigon d'ishtakech chala siptaka. You find vinegar that's siptaka, which the Ram just explains is very strong vinegar. And I don't know much about vinegar, but I guess, vinegar like you would use to, clean out the floors or something, right? So this is not like a little vinegar like you're putting on your salad. This is, heavy duty vinegar that can wash out everything. And when you find vinegar that's that strong, it obviously did not become vinegar today, right? It has to take a few days for it to become that fermented. So the ilav to akar tlata yume, if it wasn't that it was 3 days of vinegar, lo havi mishtaki chala siptaka. You wouldn't have found vinegar that's this strong. And so basically the Duromai are saying that, look, you found that it was wine last week. So for 3 days after you found it was wine, it's still wine, right? Because they hold, like Rabbi Yochanan, that if it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, it's considered wine. But then a few days pass and you find strong vinegar in the barrel. Then it must be that it became vinegar at least 3 days ago. And anything before that is a safek. So that's this Braita. It's a very interesting Braita. It's a great case. But says the Gemara, Abaya asks.
Suppose there's overlap.
Sorry?
What if there's an overlap? Because the 3 days could be.
So they're claiming there couldn't be. It's impossible. You couldn't have strong vinegar within 3 days of it being good wine. It would take a minimum of 6 days, we're saying now, to go from good wine to strong vinegar. You can go from good wine to vinegar in 3 days, but you can't go to strong vinegar in 3 days. I don't know. That's what they say. It could be climate changes, meaning in Bava it's one thing and in France it's another thing, but that's the Gemara.
So it's strong vinegar, only when it's strong vinegar, it's considered vinegar, right? In between it's suffix.
No.
We don't know.
No. So when it's strong vinegar, what the Duromai are saying is that it was for sure vinegar for 3 days before, because you can't become strong vinegar unless you were weak vinegar for 3 days. And weak vinegar, you can't take Truma and Maaser on. So you for sure can't do Truma and Maaser 3 days before the time you found the strong vinegar. Before that, we don't really know, right? Because then it's a transition point.
You got 6 days of vinegar then.
No, because according to Jeromai, the 3 days that it tastes like, it smells like vinegar, it tastes like wine, it's still considered wine. Right? Because they hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that if it's tama chala, that's right, recha chala, tama
Yeah, but if
yain.
you say it's strong vinegar, then in 3 days, but prior to that, it has to be vinegar, right?
Correct.
So these, and if we're saying the 3 days before you found it, that's
No, they're
3
not.
days
So
of
that's the
strong
point. They're
vinegar.
not saying that. They're not saying that 3 days before vinegar is vinegar. They're saying only 3 days before strong vinegar is vinegar. But if you found regular vinegar, you can say today's the day it became it. Up till today, it was not vinegar. It was wine. Possibly. It's a suffix, but possibly.
Oh, so 3 days from initial vinegar to strong vinegar. That's what they're saying.
Correct. Correct. Asked the Gemara, so, but this didn't clarify anything, right? Abaya asked Rav Yosef, what's the halacha? And he said, I know this Braita. The Braita just tells you that's a machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, right? Still, what's the halacha? Do you make a Brei Priat Geffen or not, right? So ask the Gemara, Himan Pashatle, right? So what's the halacha? 4 lines on the bottom, 5 lines on the bottom. Says the Gemara, well, we don't know. Pligi bar Rav Mari, Rav Zvid. There's a machloket Rav Mari, Rav Zvid. Chanamar halacha Rabbi Yochanan, that it's Brei Priat Geffen. Chanamar halacha Amar Kareb Yeshua ben Levi, that's Shakoni Abidvaro, and we just don't know. Okay, that is the close of that halacha. We really don't know. But ask the Gemara on the same question. We are 3 lines on the bottom. Itmar. What if, this is a machloket, right? What if, or a question, Hamocher chavit yain lechavero. A person sells a barrel of wine to his friend. Reuven sells a barrel of wine to Shimon. Shimon takes the barrel home. He opens it up a day later, and it's vinegar, vichmitza, and it has turned into vinegar. Can he get a refund? So Amar Rav, says Rav, yes. Kol shlosha yamim harishonim bereshut mocher. For 3 days after you sell it, it is not in the reshut of the mocher, but it's in the responsibility of the mocher. Meaning that if I sell someone wine, I have to guarantee that it's going to last for 3 days. Because if it doesn't last for 3 days, then it means it was already vinegar when I sold it to him. Okay, or turning into vinegar. Mikan ve'elech, if it's more than 3 days, and then we don't know when it became vinegar, that's your problem. You would have to prove that it happened before you bought it, or else you can't get a refund. That's what Rav says. So 3 days, basically. Shmuel, I'm going to turn the page now to Daf Tzadi Vav Bet.
So then he should be checking this his purchase every day or so after he buys it to see if it's within the 3-day period. Beyond 3 days, he's got no recourse.
Correct.
If he puts it in his house and lives in the basement and checks it 5 days later, he's done. He's got no recourse.
Correct. I skipped over one detail here, which is important, which is that, one of the issues here is that you bought the barrel belongs to the seller. Meaning I go to someone and say, I want to buy a barrel of wine, but I don't have a barrel to put it in. So he sells me a barrel of wine, not the barrel, right? So Reuven keeps ownership of the barrel. Shimon gets the wine. So he carries this barrel home to serve at his feast. When he's done, he's going to return the barrel, right? It's like renting a container. So the wine became vinegar inside the barrel that belonged to Reuven, but Shimon bought the wine. So says Rav, well, if it's within 3 days, it's Rav's responsibility, or not Rav, it's the Reuven's responsibility, the original seller. If it's after 3 days, it's Shimon's responsibility, meaning he can't get a refund. And Shmuel says, I completely disagree, that even though, turn the page, Shmuel Amar, that even if the barrel belongs to Reuven, and Shimon takes it home, and he opens it up 1 day later, and it turns out that it's vinegar, that is Shimon's problem, not Reuven's problem. Says Shmuel, you know why? Chamra, wine, akatba demare shavar. It literally means it turned bad on the shoulders of the current owner. So the Rashbam has a beautiful explanation, which is a little bit crazy, in my opinion, but a little bit far-fetched, we'll say, that, that the whether wine becomes bad depends on the mood and the characteristics and some nature of the owner. And so it could very well be that Reuven can claim to Shimon, look, when I owned the wine liked me and it didn't turn bad. You bought the wine and it's only because of you. It's not intrinsic to the wine. It's connected to the owner. And so there's something about wine that speaks, yayin is connected to people, and it's something about you. Now, it's not really clear what that would mean. Tosfos has a whole other shot. Tosfos says that's a little crazy, right, to think that. And Tosfos says that what it means is, it's that it's because you put it on your shoulder that you basically carried it and you moved it, and that agitated the wine and caused whatever fermentation that was going on to turn into vinegar. Meaning what Reuven would say is, look, I had a barrel of wine in my store. If nobody touched it and moved it around, it would stay good wine for 10 days, let's say. Shimon, because you picked it up and jostled it around and carried it home and weren't careful with it, the next day it became vinegar. And so that's not my responsibility, because it could be that had it stayed in my possession, it would not have become vinegar. And it's not so much because of your personality, it's because you actually put it on your shoulder and jostled it around. So that's a little bit more scientific, I guess, but the Rashbam is always fun, right? So
you're
Shmuel
in the
says,
Rashbam, you're referring to the section where he says, Adam medale kalomer mazlo gorem chet shel balayayin.
yeah, Maslow means your fortune, right?
Right, right.
So that's what the Rashbam has, it more a little magical, right? That if I own wine, it might be good luck. If you own wine, it's bad luck and it turns bad. And so what Reuven can claim is that it's not my fault that the wine went bad. It's because you got bad luck, Shimon, right? But if it had stayed in my house, it wouldn't have gone bad, which just from a biological standpoint doesn't make a ton of sense. But so Tosfos' explanation makes more scientific sense, right? That it has to do with the fact that you jostled it around and you moved it and you woke up the fermentation process.
But
Anyways,
when the Rashbam begins here, Eino chayav b'achvito, afal pi shechmitz betoch chavit shel mocher. But when he says that Eino chayav b'achvito, but who's it referring to? The buyer or the seller?
Reuven, the seller, is not responsible to pay back. Because even though Shimon bought wine and he gets home and 2 days later it's bad, Reuven can say it only went bad because of you, not because of me. Says the Gemara, Ovid Rav Yosef Uvda, the second line. Rav Yosef did a Maisa, meaning it happened in an actual case. And Rav Yosef Paskin like Kavatei de Rav B'Shichra, like Rav, that you go after, that you are responsible as the original owner when it comes to beer, because if it goes bad, it means it was already going bad. And kavatei de Shmuel b'chamra, but he passed like Shmuel when it came to wine. And hilchot kavatei Shmuel, in fact, the halacha is like Shmuel, that it is your responsibility. You can never say, I bought it, I didn't do anything to it, and it went bad, so it would have gone bad in the previous owner. It could be because of something you did to it. So we can't prove it. Tanura Banan. Now continues the Gemara. We are continuing the halacha of bracha, 4 lines from the top.
You say we can't prove it, but we in the end we say the halacha is like Shmuel in the case of wine.
Right. That's so Shmuel, meaning you can't prove. So therefore, so since you can't prove it, you can't collect. Right. Shimon would have to prove that it was Reuven's fault, that it was basically
okay.
To the wine.
He can't prove that it was okay. I thought you meant we have no proof on which way is halacha. That's what
possible Shmuel, because maybe, right? Even Shmuel's saying it's possible, not for sure. Now, Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita, which is what we've discussed yesterday and today, Echad Shechar Tamarim, whether you're talking about beer made out of dates, which was the very common beer they made in Bavel. I think they had a lot of dates in Bavel, as you know. Echad Shechar Sorim, or you have barley beer, which of course is what we make mostly in the West, I believe, right? Beer made out of barley. Ve'echad Shimrei Yayin, or Shimrei Yayin. Now, Shimrei Yayin is a whole new concept. And it's one that we're going to actually discuss now for a couple of days and more later, which are literally means I don't know how to translate it in English, but you soak, shamar means to soak in the wine, meaning what they would do is they would take the grapes and they would step on them and crush them, and basically wine would come out of them. But then you were left at the bottom with all these grapes and maybe leaves and seeds that still had some of the product of the grapes inside of them. And so what they would then do is they would put water inside it. The water would agitate it and soak up some of that flavor. And that water would, I guess it had alcohol in it too. That water would basically be wine water, right? So that's what we call shimrei yayin. I think my thing has a word, pomace. I don't know what that means. But anyways, it's what we always call temed in the Gemara. But it's the shmarim. It's water that was soaked with the lees, right? The extra leftover of the wine and absorb some of the flavor. Says the Braita, those things, that's not wine. You make a bracha of shakon yebedvaro on the beer, which of course we all know about, and on that wine, because it's not really wine. It's soaked water that got the taste of wine, but it's not wine. Acherim omrim, but that's what the Braita at the beginning says, the Tanakama. But Acherim say, no. Shmarim sheyesh mem tam yayin. If the shmarim have a taste of wine, meaning if it tastes, it has a noticeable taste of the wine, then mevarachin aleim brei pri hagafen, then you do say brei pri hagafen. And Rabbah and Rav Yosef, Damri Tervayu, the Amoraim, late Amoraim, Rabbah and Rav Yosef both said Ein halacha ka'achirim. The achirim are not right. Halacha is like the Tanakama that you say shakon yebidvaro. Now, says Rava, let me clarify exactly what you make on what bracha you make on what. Says Rava, the kuliyama, meaning both the Tanakama and the achirim are in agreement that if, let's say, again, you have a barrel, it's got the leftover grape seeds and grapes that are crushed and skins and all this stuff on the bottom. You pour water into that barrel, right? Says Rava, if you ramatlata, let's say you put 3 liters of water, right? 3 measures of water. And you go there and you agitate it, you come the next day and you pour it out and you strain it, and you got 4 liters of brown, grape-looking water, right? Vata arba'a. Well, then for sure, chamra. Then it's for sure all considered wine because you put in 3, you got out 4. So clearly the 4th liter, let's just say a liter, is leftover juices from the wine that basically were absorbed into the shmarim that were released once you put in the water and you agitated it, right? So basically you have 1 portion of wine, 3 portions of water. But 3 portions of water, 1 portion of wine is a pretty normal ratio. Remember, they used to dilute their wine, right? And that says the Gemara Rava l'tamei. That's exactly what Rava holds. Damar Rava is always of the opinion that kol chamra d'lodari al chad tlat maya, any wine that you don't dilute 1 portion of wine to 3 portions of water, lav chamru, it's not good wine, right? Because Rava always held that you had to dilute your wine, and that's what made it good wine. And so here, basically, you're taking 3 portions of water, you pour them into this barrel, you then strain out the results, and you get 4 portions of, we'll call it wine water. That says Rava, that's wine, because it's 1 portion of wine, 3 portions of water, and that's normally what we treat wine. How, as you make Repriya Gafen. But let's say you put in 3 liters of water, Rama Tlata, and when you pour this all out the next day or whenever you do it, there's only 3 liters of, purple looking water, right? You get 3 back. So then lav klumu, then that's not wine because it just turned it purple, but it didn't actually change anything. You put 3 liters of water, your 3 liters of water came back. And therefore everyone agrees that you say shakon yebidvaro, no matter what it tastes like. Ki pligi, the machloket between the Tanakama, who says it's shahakol, and the achirim who say brei pri hagafen, is, let's say the Rama Tlata, you put 3 liters, let's say, of water into this container, and you agitated it and came back, ata Tlata upalga. You have 3.5 liters at the end. So now 3.5 liters seems like half a liter to 3, right? 1 to 6, right? So Rabbanan say, well, you put in 3, Tlata ayal, you put in 3 liters of water. Again, I'm using liters, but 3 portion, you can use any portion. 3 portions of water. Tlata nafik, now from what came out, the 3.5 that came out, 3 of that was water. Pashle palga, you're left over with half a liter, and that's 1/6. Palga b'shita, palgi mayim, right? 1 in 6 portions is still water, meaning that's not considered wine, even though it does taste a little bit like wine and it looks a little bit like wine. It's not the right ratio. 1 out of 6 is batel. It's very interesting, right? Usually we talk about batel b'shishim, batel b'meya. Here, or batel b'rov even. Here it's 1 in 6. That 1 in 6, 1 portion wine, 6 portions water, it's batel. And everyone agrees, well, not everyone agrees. The Rabbanan say, lav klumhi. It's not anything, meaning it's not any wine, and you make shakon yebidvaro. And the achirim say, that's not how we view it. Because look, you had this mushy stuff in the bottom, right? You poured 3 liters of water into that. And you came out with 3.5 liters of purple colored water that tastes like wine. But you know what probably happened, say the achirim? Look, achirim savri, tlata, you put 3 portions into the barrel. Train upal ganafik, you only got 2.5 portions of water out of the barrel, meaning your 3rd half portion, your 6th half portion, right, of water was actually absorbed into the mush in the bottom. And what came out of that mush was a liter of wine, right? So basically, because you know for sure that something came out of the mush, right? You put in 3, you came out with 3.5. So clearly you got liquid out of that mush at the bottom. Say the achirim, maybe what happened was, or probably what happened was, that some of the water you put in displaced wine basically from that mush. And so when you got out 3.5 liters, 2.5 liters of that is water, 1 liter is wine. And half of your liter of water is stuck there in the bottom. In which case, the ratio is 1 to 2.5, right? And remember, Rav already said that if it's 1 to 3, it's still wine. 1 to 2.5 is for sure wine. You for sure say Berei Priagafen. And so that's why the Achirim hold, right? I'm going to read the words inside. Tlata ol, you put 3 liters in of water, but you only took out 2.5. Treinu palganafik. Pashle kuza, you got one. Now, this is really the measurement. Kuza means a jug. 1 jar, I called it a liter, but 1 liter left. And so you basically have 1 liter of wine, 2.5 of water, and kuza, 1 liter, betreo palga chamra ma'alyahu. If you have 2.5, that's considered regular wine, right? Because Rav, remember, said even 1 to 3 is wine. So certainly 1 to 2.5. And so therefore, according to the Achirim, this would be considered wine because, and the Rashbam, the Tosfos really more so, really speak out that it's because you know something came out. Meaning, when you put 3 liters in and 3 liters come out, you can also argue maybe 2 liters of water came out and 1 liter of wine, right? How do you prove that the 3 liters that came out are none of the wine from inside of the thing? But there, because the amount didn't go up, you can also make the assumption that it was no extra wine, just some flavors and taste from the dregs, right? But in this case, you put in 3 liters and you got out 3.5. So clearly you got out more liquid than you put in. So there's definitely some wine there. And once there's some wine, you have to be concerned or assume that there's actually more wine that came out and the water was absorbed. And therefore, say the Achirim, you make a bracha of Brei Priagafen. Of course, Rabbi and Rav Yosef said that's not the halacha, and the halacha is like the Chachamim that you don't make a bracha.
They put in 3. They put in 3 liters of water, and they retrieved 2.5.
3.5, 3.5.
No, it said train upalga nafi 2.5.
No, so they returned 3.5. So they put in 3 and they came back with 3.5 of liquid. The question is that liquid, how much of that liquid is water and how much of it is wine? So say the Achirim, if you put in 3 liters of water and you get out 3.5 liquid, what you can assume is that 2.5 of that is water and 1 of that is wine, right? Now, what happened to your other half a liter of water? It was absorbed into the shmarim in replacement of the wine that basically came out of them.
Where's one? Where's the other? Wait a second. They put in 3 and they get out 2.5 water.
No, again, you said the same thing again. Listen to me.
You
put
said
in
2.5
and
water.
got out 3.5, not
What?
2.5, 3.5. Okay. Now, what's the question?
No, the Gemara says talata ul. They put in 3, right? Isn't that what they put in 3?
And they got out 3.5.
But it says train upalga 2.5.
No,
Nothing.
2.5 is water. You came out 3.5.
Right, so they got 2.5 water.
No, you got 3.5. I don't much. Just please. The Gemara says you put in 3 and you came out with 3.5. The question is 3.5 of liquid. What is that liquid made up of? So say the Achirim, the liquid is made up potentially of 2.5 water and 1 of wine.
Okay, so right, so there's 2.5 of water.
And 1 of wine.
Okay, so first of all, there's 2.5 of water. Okay, so then that means, how do they get, if they put in 3 and they come out 2.5 of water? So where
Ken,
do they get?
You're not listening. That's not what happened. Listen, I don't know why. Trust me.
That's what you just said. There's 2.5 water and 1 wine.
Right, but those are together, right? They're not separate. You put in 3 liters and you came out with 3.5 liters. That's the case. So now what's your question?
So the question is, if so 2.5 is water, right?
What's the question?
I'm trying to understand the math here. We're saying that 2.5 of whatever came out is water.
And 1 is wine.
And 1 is wine. So if he put in only 3 of water, which it says halata ul, then how do you get 2.5 plus 1? That's 3.5 comes out. That's the question.
How does that happen?
I mean, you only put in 3. How do you get 3.5 out?
So the way you get 3.5 out is that some of what's inside of the dregs, the mud on the bottom of the barrel, is liquid. And so when you take it out, you strain that out and you get extra liquid more than what you put in. And that's wine.
So what part is the wine? that's a full liter or a half a liter?
So again, what the Acherim say is that you put in 3, you got back 3.5. Of the 3.5 you got back, you assume that 2.5 of that is water and 1 of that is wine. 1 liter is wine. So again, they're all mixed together. There's no water and wine here. It's one container, right? It's one
I
jug.
understand it's one container, but we're saying 2.5 of that is water. And
Correct.
1 of that is wine.
Right. So
why not say that if he puts in 3 and he gets 3.5 out, why not say that 3 is water and half is wine? Why do you have to say that 1 is?
So that's certainly possible. So I explained that, but I'll say it again. What the Rashbam explains for the Achirim is that they assume that once you're basically displacing the wine, you can assume that water goes into that mud. I'm going to call it mud, but the mush at the bottom and displaces wine. And so I guess wine is heavier or whatever. I don't actually know why the physics would make any sense, but that the water is basically being absorbed into those shmarim, and the liquid that you now see includes an extra amount of wine instead of that water. And so therefore, the ratio, if it's 1 to 2.5, is for sure wine, right? Because even 1 to 3 would be wine. And that's why the Achirim say you make the Brei Pri Hagafen. Again, that's the Achirim. The Chachamim disagree. So you can hold like the Chachamim if that sounds more reasonable to you. And they disagree and say, look, the ratio is you put in 3 water, you get back 3.5, assume 3 of that is water, and 1/2 of that is wine, which is what sounds like you're more comfortable with. And therefore, you don't make a Brei Pri Hagafen because it's a 1 to 6 ratio. Okay, let's stop
But
there.
now, okay, I'm still trying to understand that. But earlier we said if you put in 3 and you get out 4, right?
Yes.
So that is that they said that's wine, right?
1 is wine and 3 is water.
1
Again,
is wine because that wine
it can't be anything else. You put in 3. I mean, it's income magically out 4, right? So the fact that you put in 3 and got out 4 means that a minimum of 1 is wine, right? Now, it could very well be, according to the Achirim, it's more than 1. It could be 1.5 are wine, but it doesn't matter because once you have 1 to 3, it's already considered wine.
So isn't that diluted? I mean, we're putting in 3 and you're saying it's more concentrated?
Yeah, so remember, that's what Rava said. That's what normal wine was in those times. 1 part wine, 3 parts water. Remember, they used to always dilute their wine. I'm not sure. So that's considered to be regular wine. 1 part wine, 3 parts water.
So that is wine, but it's diluted and it's still. So if they put in 3 and 3, let's say they put in 3 and they get out 3. So isn't that more concentrated? Why wouldn't that be wine?
Because right. So since there's no evidence that you actually increased the volume, there's no way to indicate that you actually got any wine. And you have to assume that none of that is wine. That's 3 liters of water went in, 3 liters of water came out, and you make a shakoni abidvaro. Now, remember, it looks purple, there's no question, right? And it might even taste like wine. But the fact that 3 liters went in and 3 liters came out means that it's not considered to be wine, and you make shakoni abidvaro according to everybody.
It seems counterintuitive because that's more concentrated than 3.
I'm not sure you mean more. There's no wine in it. It's not concentrated. What? Right? You put in 3 liters of water, you got out 3 liters of liquid. So you assume that that's water. Anyways, we're going to continue this tomorrow. I encourage you to review it again so you get it better and more comfortable with it. And tomorrow we will continue. We're not done talking about putting in wine, putting in water, getting out higher quantities. So stay tuned for tomorrow morning. Shavua Tov, everyone. I'm not going to see you all. So Shana Tova. And God willing, we'll learn together at some time. We'll put in the time, Motzei Rosh Hashanah.
Shana Tova, thank you and good night.
Shana Tova and good night.